good afternoon to one and all present here. My name is Nooria Siddiqui. It's my pleasure to welcome our esteemed resource person, Miss Alina Ansari. She holds a BA Honours and MA from IEHE Bhopal, qualified NET in 2024 and currently serving as an assistant professor at Oriental Institute of Science and Technology. We are honored to have her with us today and look forward to her valuable insights.
Good morning, everyone. And today I'll be teaching you about British poetry, something which is very important for all of us, as every literature, every genre, every piece of art began with poetry. So we'll be beginning with this introduction. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and as we all know, this quote has been famously written by Wordsworth. Right? So, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and it takes its origin from emotions recollected in tranquility. William Wordsworth said this. Now, what he meant by this quote is that emotions are there within us, and there are two kinds of emotions. Right? One is pristine emotion. Pristine emotions are the emotions which are there in our heart, and they are we are unaware of their existence. And there is another kind of emotion that is spontaneous, which arises due to some event. When some or the other event arises, comes across, and we come across something that is really, wavering, then we feel that emotion within us. So there are two kinds of emotion, pristine and spontaneous. And there are mellifluous and euphorious phases of poetry, which means that poetry pleases your ears, eyes, and heart. And Browning said this famously, that poetry has three purposes. It pleases your ears, eyes, and heart. So, also, as William Hazlitt famously quotes, that if there's anything worth remembering, it is poetry. So, poetry is a record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest and best minds. This is written by P.B. Shelley. And poetry is a speaking picture to teach and delight. This was written by Philip Sidney in An Apology for Poetry. Very famous lines, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Kisne likha hai? Can anybody tell me? Who's the author?
John Keats.
Wonderful. Who was this? Srijan, I guess. Nice, Srijan. So when we read this, it says that a thing of beauty is a joy forever. But this entire sentence is a complete being in itself. It is having accuracy and brevity. Poetry needs to be accurate, it needs to be concise, but it needs to convey the entire message. Fine. So this is telling you a complete story within itself. A thing of beauty is a joy forever, and now you can connect to multiple things with your own experiences, with your own, past being, so on and so forth. Next, we have the background of poetry. Poetry has been around since prehistoric times and has evolved in different ways across the world. It's an art form that often involves rhythm, sound, and meaning, and can evoke strong emotions. Poetry likely began as an oral tradition with people singing or reciting poems to remember history, genealogy, and law. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Sumerian, is one of the oldest surviving poems. The Rig Veda, a collection of Sanskrit hymns, is an ancient example of poetry. The Iliad and the Odyssey, attributed to Homer, are early examples of Western epic poetry. Defining British poetry, a historical overview. See, earlier, initially, we had Caedmon and Cynewulf. Caedmon was a shepherd, and he didn't really know poetry, but and there used to be competitions in the church, and where they were supposed to be present over there, and they used to attend these kinds of ceremonies. And what happened, that Caedmon was standing over there, and he was a poor shepherd, and everyone asked him to sing. and he was so afraid and he was embarrassed and he was humiliated. Nobody humiliated him, but he himself was feeling bad for himself because he couldn't read and write and he was not educated enough to speak a poem in front of everybody. That night when he went back home, he went to sleep, and then when he woke up, he wrote a 9-line poem. And it is said that God blessed him with that wisdom, with that brain, which influenced him to write a poem big enough of 9 lines. So that was the first incidence where a man wrote a poem on his own. And then after that, we have Cinewolf, and then we have Geoffrey Chaucer. Can anyone tell me which great work Geoffrey Chaucer wrote?
Canterbury Tales.
Canterbury Tales.
Canterbury Tales, very good, very good. Canterbury Tales is one of the most celebrated works of him. But apart from that, he also wrote the Last Duchess, and no, he also wrote the Book of the Duchess. The Book of the Duchess he wrote, and then apart from that, he also wrote Troilus and Cresside and many other works. But this is the very famous work of him. Early beginnings, British poetry traces its root to the oral traditions of the Celts and Anglo-Saxons. Early works like Beowulf showcased alliterative verse and epic narratives. This period laid the foundation for the rich literary tapestry to come. Fine. And apart from that, we also have Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The poems were basically the epics were made or written on the work which they have done. There was a holy grail for which they used to hunt, and whichever country will get that holy grail. What is a holy grail? It's basically a cup from which Christ drank water. So they used to find it, and whosoever finds the holy cup, their entire nation or the community will be happy, and there will be a lot of yield that particular year, so on and so forth. So they used to write the poetries and poems and epics related to that point or at that point of time in those days. Coming on to medieval era, Geoffrey Chaucer emerged as a pivotal figure. His Canterbury Tales making a shift towards Middle English and introducing diverse characters and social commentary. The medieval era also saw the rise of ballads, narrative songs passed down through generations. Now, who all were the contemporaries of Geoffrey Chaucer? Can anyone tell me? Can anyone tell me who were the contemporaries of Geoffrey Chaucer?
William Langland
William Langland,
and John Wycliffe.
John Wycliffe,
John Guare.
John Gower. And which work of Chaucer was attributed to John Gower? Oh, Moral Gower.
Troilus and Cressida. Troilus and Cresside.
Troilus and Cresside. Troilus and Cressida. Troilus and Cressida was written by Chaucer, and Troilus and Cresside was written by
Shakespeare as well.
Shakespeare as well, and one more writer. Well, we'll come to that later on. Otherwise, we'll be in the maze of these writers only. To this was that Troilus and Cresside was written by Chaucer, and it is dedicated to O Moral Gower. And this was the inspirational work, and many works were inspired by this. And one more inspired work was Troilus and Cressida. And you need to find it out by yourself who wrote this. Moving on, we have Renaissance and beyond. So the Renaissance brought an explosion of creativity with poets like William Shakespeare and Edmund Spenser, crafting sonnets and allegorical epics. Subsequent centuries witnessed the rise of movements like Romanticism and Modernism, each leaving an indelible mark on poetry. So can anyone tell me which was the which was the long narrative poem written by William Shakespeare? We all know that he wrote sonnets, but which was the long narrative poem written by Shakespeare? Venus and Adonis. Who answered?
Mukta.
Very good, Mugdha. Venus and Adonis. He also wrote the Rape of the Lucrece, and he also wrote the Phoenix and the Turtle. So there were a lot of long narrative poems which were written by Shakespeare, but his sonnets and his plays, his dramas got so famous that it somehow became an understatement to mention about the poems which he wrote, and people don't really glorify the works other than the sonnets and the plays. But he has written amazing long poems and long narratives. Then, apart from that, who wrote Adonis? Who wrote Adonis?
P.B.
P.B.
Shelley.
Shelley.
P.B. Shelley. For
John Keats.
very good. Who wrote? Who can tell me the name of all the odes written by Keats?
Ode to Autumn, Ode to Nightingale, Ode to Grecian Urn, and I think there was one more. I forgot that.
And there are three more. Ode to Melancholy, Ode to Psyche, Ode to Nightingale. And all of these were published in 1819. And then, he had a very short span of time. Keats lived for a very short tenure, but he gave ample of, what we can say, ample of poems for us to understand what kind of a writer he was. And if he would have lived longer, it is said that he would have been a great competition to Shakespeare and Wordsworth. But because it is what it is, so moving on. Who wrote Wasteland?
T.S. Eliot.
Can you tell me any other work of T.S. Eliot?
Ma'am, Burnt Norton.
The Burnt Norton, Ash Wednesday. Fine. Then, can you tell me any poem by Sylvia Plath?
Lady Lazarus.
Very good. And
The Mad Girl's Love Song.
very good.
And
Tulips
Daddy.
and Daddy. Very good. Very good. Wonderful. So, core elements, sound, imagery, and figurative language. Sound devices. British poetry employs a range of sound devices. Now, what is sound devices? Because whenever we are reading a poem, there is a kind of sound, there is a kind of rhyme, there is kind of rhythm that follows the poetry. So it enhances its musicality and emotional impact. Alliteration, assonance, consonance, and onomatopoeia create rhythm and texture. Rhyme schemes, such as those found in sonnets, further contribute to the auditory experience. See, you all must have heard of this poem, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Have you all heard of this? Do you remember?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. You know in which class you studied this poem?
Ma'am, KG.
In KG. You also studied other things in KG. Do you remember them so well? Like a passage or a quote or anything else?
No, ma'am.
No. Why? Because everything which is rhyming, which is having a sort of rhythm, is very catchy, and your brain gets attracted towards it, and it absorbs the entire thing in it, and it stays there forever. Like if you remember a song, if you listen to songs, a lot of songs, and you will remember the songs word by word. But if you'll read 10 stories or 20 stories, you'll hardly remember two or three of them word by word exactly in the same chronological order, because it is not having the rhyme in it. Your brain remembers the rhyme, due to which you are able to remember the songs, due to which you are able to remember a nursery rhyme. You're getting my point? Now, do you understand why sound devices are important, and we are going to delve into it further?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Do you have any questions so far? Is there any doubt?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So moving on. Sound devices. I will be telling you about assonance. See, assonance is the resemblance of sounds between syllables of nearby words and arising particularly from the rhyming of two or more stressed vowels but not consonants. So we'll be talking about the stressed consonants and not vowels. And for example, sonnet, porridge, they sound similar somehow. Then killed, cold, cult, they are also sounding similar. This is known as assonance, where the consonants are repeated. The consonant sounds are repeated, and not exactly the consonants, because killed begins with K and cult begins with cold. So assonance is a sound device which is used in poetry. Then moving on, we have consonants. The consonance is the recurrence of similar sounding consonants in close proximity. For example, same, home, and then discrete and shut. Now, if you listen to discrete and shut, the emphasis on T in both the words is same. This is known as consonance. Fine. So when the recurrence of similar sounding consonants are close to each other, similar sounding consonants, that is when the repetition of similar sounding words are there, it is known as consonants. And when the syllables are there which are having same emphasis and they are coming together, that is known as assonance. Fine. Words and syllables are the two different things. Next we have onomatopoeia. Can anyone tell me what is onomatopoeia?
Repetition of sounds like tip tip.
Tip,
I don't know.
crash, bang, buzz. Yeah, exactly. The sounds which are there in the external world but which are used in the poems. So we address to them as onomatopoeia, and they can be any sound which you hear, like the cat's meow, the dog's bark. Then what is imagery? Can anyone tell me what is imagery? What is imagery? Imagery is basically the visual description of anything. It is said that painting is. It is said that poetry is a speaking picture and painting is a silent poetry. So what is a speaking picture? When someone says that I was walking and the snowflake fell on my toe and I could feel the amount of coolness it was delivering in my body, in my feet, through my shoes and my socks. So can you imagine what I'm talking about? There was a garden where children were running here and there on the swings and they were yelling and screaming and they were shouting and they were happy. Can you picturize what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
This is imagery, right? And what is personification? The attribution of a personal nature or human characteristic. Right? Personification is the death is waiting for me. Fine. Can death wait for someone? Is death a human being worth enough to wait? When I am giving human attributes to a non-human thing, that is known as personification. Fine. किसी भी non-human thing को, for a pen, if I say this pen is speaking volumes, can a pen speak volume? No, I'm personifying it. Fine, I'm giving it a human attribute that it can speak volumes. You getting my point? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any doubt?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am, all good.
Okay. Now we have vivid imagery. Imagery is crucial in poetry, allowing poets to paint pictures with words. British poets masterfully evoke sensory experiences using descriptive language to transport readers to different places, times, and emotional states. Similes and metaphors enrich this process by drawing comparisons that deepen understanding. Fine. Now you all close your eyes. Just close your eyes, sit there, And imagine that you are walking. Have you all closed your eyes? You'll have to open your eyes to switch on the mic and say yes. Have
Yes,
you all
ma'am.
closed your eyes?
Yes, ma'am.
Now close your eyes and then imagine that you're walking on a path. It's a pavement, and after that, as the pavement ends, you have reached a bridge, and from that bridge you can see that there is water on both the sides. And as you cross the bridge, you happen to see the Eiffel Tower. You are in Paris. You are holding a bouquet of red roses and a lot of balloons in one hand, and everything is very beautiful. Now open your eyes. Did you see everything, whatever I said?
Yes, ma'am.
You
Yes,
got
ma'am.
an idea? This is imagery. When a poet takes you to places without actually moving you from where you are, that is imagery. Next, we have figurative language. There is an error, language, language. Figurative language adds layers of meaning and complexity to poetry. Metaphors, similes, personification, and hyperbole are employed to convey abstract ideas and emotions in concrete and relatable terms. These devices invite readers to interpret poetry in multiple levels. So, first we have metaphor. What is the metaphor? A comparison between two unlike things without using like or as. Fine. Can anyone give me an example of a metaphor?
Oh, ma'am, all the world's a stage.
Yes. Very good. Now, simile. What is a simile? A simile is a comparison between two unlike things using like or as. Now, do we have an example for that? Can anyone give me an example for a simile?
As lazy as a dodo.
As lazy as a dodo. Then we have alliteration. I've already told you. There was a very famous song which came lately and which was being used for alliterations example very often these days. Can anyone tell me this song? You all must have heard Billo Bagge Bilyada Ki Karegi. You must have heard it, right
Yes,
or not?
ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So it was being used as a meme for alliteration, and that is the best example through which you can remember it your entire life what alliteration is, and you won't forget it. So we have some elements which are important for poetry. First is alliterative verse. It was used in the medieval era, and Anglo-Saxons also used it. So it is the repetition of the repetition of the consonant sound in the entire statement. For example, Liza loves to look at the lizards in the aquarium. Fine. So which alphabet is being repeated here?
L.
L. Then we have alliteration. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Which alphabet is being repeated here?
F.
F. And which work has these lines been taken from?
Macbeth.
Macbeth. Then we have anaphora. Anaphora is where the first word or first two words of any line are the same. For example, 5 years past, 5 long summers. What is being repeated here? "5 years past, 5 long summers." Anaphora is the repetition of one word in the beginning of every line, every consecutive line. So which word is being repeated here?
5.
5. What is epiphora? Epiphora is the opposite of anaphora. Now, in epiphora, the last word is on repetition mode. For example, the government is of the people, by the people, for the people. So this is epiphora. Anaphora is where the first word is being repeated again and again. Are you getting my point?
Yes, ma'am.
Then we have apostrophe. Death be not proud. Apostrophe is basically when a person is talking to something or someone which is not physically present over there. Fine. but we are imagining the thing to be there. Like in Macbeth, Macbeth saw the dagger, but was the dagger present over there? No. Similarly, where Death Be Not Proud is being talked, who is the author of Death Be Not Proud, by the way?
John Donne.
John Donne. So here the death was not present over there, but the death was being addressed to, the death was being talked to. Right. So that's how apostrophe works. Next we have conceits. Two legs of a compass are compared to the lovers. Which poem am I talking to? Am I talking
Forbidding morning. A valediction forbidding morning.
Valediction forbidding morning. So it is talking about the conceits. Conceits is basically not talking about the exact thing, but comparing the thing to something exactly opposite to it. Can anyone imagine of comparing two lovers with the two legs of a compass? No, but this is what a conceit is. Fine. Then we have chiasmus. Chiasmus is basically two sentences, two opposite sentences, and they are in the same flow, but both the sentences are having equal meaning, but they are exact opposite of each other. Two legs, all for one and one for all. Also, another example is you can take a tiger out of a jungle, but you cannot take out the jungle out of a tiger. Also, something which I read and which really was catchy, that never let a fool kiss you and never let a kiss fool you. Or you must hate someone that you will one day love them, and you must love someone that keeping this mind that you might one day hate them. Fine. So these are basically two opposite sentences followed by each other. Both the sentences are having meaning, but both the sentences are having opposite meanings. Fine? Getting my point?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Then we have hyperbole. Hyperbole is basically exaggeration of anything which is not necessarily important. Fine. किसी भी चीज को बढ़ा चढ़ा के बोलना. Like sweet smell of violets came from the lover's breath. Is it even possible? Anything they're saying and putting forward, just flowering, which is not even worth decorating. Next, we have imagery. As I already told you, it's like I wandered lonely as a cloud. Now, if you'll close your eyes and you'll think that how you'll wander lonely as a cloud will be there in your brain in a blue sky and it is wandering lonely. So you'll be able to imagine it, and that is imagery. Then we have juxtaposition, which is putting two entirely opposite things together to tell you the importance of both the things, to tell you the importance of, to tell you the pros and cons of both the things, so that you can evaluate on your own. Fine. It is not giving you its statement, it is giving you how you can at your level differentiate between the two. Fine. The earlier one, in which we were having two opposite statements, they were giving you their opinion basically through that statement, and you had to understand it. But here you have to evaluate on your own which is better. That is juxtaposition. Not which is better, but which holds more quality, and so on and so forth. Like, better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Where are these lines taken from? Very famous word.
Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. Then we have kenning. Beyond the Vale Road. Can you tell me what they are talking about? What is a Vale Road? What is a Vale Road? They are talking about an ocean. A Wales road is ocean. So beyond the ocean. Kenning is something which they do not talk about the thing which they are talking, but they'd rather make a story instead of saying the exact word. Fine. So the beyond the Vale Road is beyond the ocean, they could have simply mentioned, but the kenning is how to, artistically make it different and make it captivating and make it, more entreating for the person to enjoy it further. Also, like two-legged weapon. This was used in Pope's, you need to tell me the work again. What, the Rape of the Lock, of course. What is a two-legged weapon? What is a two-legged weapon?
A scissor.
A scissor. And it was being used to cut the lock of Belinda. Fine. So instead of saying that he used a scissor, he said a two-legged weapon. Why? Because a scissor would have been very normal, very, very colloquial, so to speak of. But two-legged weapon is a glorified word, and you'll have to think it sounds more intellectual for the writers, basically. That's all. Next we have oxymoron, sweet sorrow. You also tell me what all oxymorons come to your mind whenever, like, you have lived quite some life, so you must be knowing a few oxymorons. Please tell me more.
Sweet pain.
Sweet pain and tell me
Happy
more.
tears, maybe.
Happy tears and while I was in 12th, there was a work, and in that work, there was this one oxymoron, and I can never forget about it, and that is elaborate carelessness. You cannot be careless with elaboration, like elaborate carelessness. The next is onomatopoeia. We have already discussed it. Pathetic fallacy. Very important. Pathetic fallacy was the term given by John Ruskin. You need to write it somewhere. This is an important information. And all the works, all the quotes, all the things which I have been discussing so far, they are important with all the exams point of view, as well as for your information. So basically, this is something which you have to write, that the term was given by John Ruskin. And for example, smiling skies, bitter winters, pathos is a Greek word, and pathetic means fake emotions. Fine. So in pathetic fallacy, what happens is, basically, whatever I am feeling, I am thinking that the entire world is with me in the same thing, and whatever is happening, I'll give them a fake emotion so that they are also feeling the same thing. For example, if I am feeling sad and if I am crying, and it is July and August, in the month of July and August, and it is raining simply the way it does, but I'll say that the sky is crying because I am in utter pain. So this is pathetic fallacy, where I am transferring and I am feeling the emotions which I am having in the surroundings, in the environment where I am living. Okay? Do you get my point? Do you get what pathetic fallacy is? The fake emotions which I transfer or I give to the environment in which I am living in, so that the emotions can be felt more intensely by the reader. Do you understand this?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Any doubts?
No, ma'am.
See, initially, when you read imagery, personification, and pathetic fallacy, you might get confused between the three, and there is no big deal in it. But if you jot down the definitions of all three on a paper and then read them again, you will realize the evident difference between the three. Fine. Moving on, paradox. It's paradox, not paradox. Paradox is which is a statement which is contradicting itself. A child is the father of the man. Is it possible? No. But this is the line. And this line is given by William Wordsworth. In which work?
My heart leaps up.
Moving on. Personification. Because I could not stop for death, he stopped for me. Here you have personified death, that there is a man and he stopped for you. Fine. Then we have simile. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose. This is by Robert Burns, very, very famous poem. And here you are comparing it to the rose, the love. Who is your love is basically your girlfriend or your wife. Fine. And you are comparing her to the red, red rose. Means she is very beautiful and she's perfect and she is so fine. So that's how it is. It's simile. When you're comparing two things. Then what is transferred epithet? That is, I had a wonderful day. The day was the same as usual. Fine, the sun rose and then the sun went down and everything was the same. You were feeling good. So you transferred your emotion to the day. This is known as transferred epithet. Okay? Next question. What is an obede? A poem addressing a non-human entity, a poem addressing dawn, a poem in the form of an argument, a medieval poem that gives instructions. Tell me. What is an obede?
A poem addressing dawn.
A poem addressing dawn. Very good. Next. If Maud by Tennyson is a monodrama, then which of the following is a monodrama? Your options are Happy Days by Beckett, The Princess by Tennyson, Christabel by Coleridge, and Samson Agonistes by Milton. I know most of you might not have gone through any of these works. You might have heard of Happy Days or Samson Agonistes, but the rest, Christabel by Coleridge. But the thing is that you will have to go through these works as well, because these works are also important. And monodrama is something where the speaker is speaking the entire thing, and it's basically a monologue, but the entire drama is presented to you by this person, the only speaker. Fine. And can you guess? I know, any wild guess, just like that, because I understand you might not have read any of these works.
Happy
Tell me.
Days by Beckett.
Happy Days by Beckett. Very good. Who was this?
Anushka ma'am.
Very good, Anushka. Correct. Now we have meter. Iambic meters, trochee, dactyl, anapest, spondy, and pyrrhic. Now, what is an iamb? What is an iamb? Iamb consists of one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, as in despair, exclude, repeat. Fine. So in despair, which word do you think is stressed? Is despair. Exclude, repeat. So the first part is stressed or the second part is stressed?
The second part is stress.
The second part is stressed. So this is known as iamb, where one unstressed and the other stressed work is there. Then we have trochee. Trochee is a metrical foot containing one stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable. Just the opposite of iamb is trochee, as in sister, flower, splinter. So you are paying more stress on the first part of the word rather than on the second part of the word. You getting my point?
Yes, ma'am.
Is this clear? Good. Now next we have dactyl. Dactyl is comprised one stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllable. One stressed and two unstressed. Similar. Fine. So C is stressed and Miller is unstressed. Then we have anapest. Consists of three syllables where the first two are unstressed and the last one is stressed. For example, incomprehend. For example, comprehend. Fine. To comprehend. And then we have spondy. Spondy contains two stressed syllables like drum beat. Fine. Pyrrhic is the opposite of spondy and contains two unstressed syllables. तो दो स्ट्रेस्ड syllables जिसमें उसे स्पॉन्डी कहते हैं, जिसमें दो अनस्ट्रेस्ड syllables हैं उसे पायरिक कहते हैं, जिसमें एक अनस्ट्रेस्ड है और एक स्ट्रेस्ड है उसे आयम्ब कहते हैं, और जिसमें एक स्ट्रेस्ड है जिसमें एक अनस्ट्रेस्ड है उसे ट्रोकी कहते हैं. For now, you can just learn the first three, iamb, trochee and dactyl. आपको इतना याद हो जाएगा, then you will be able to make the connections by the rest of the words. Fine. बाकी का सब easy हो जाएगा if you just learn the first three of them. iamb और trochee और dactyl का आपको पता होना is very important, but later on you can mug up or learn about the rest of them. Then we have exploring poetic forms. So first is haiku. Haiku is a 3-line poem with a 5, 7 and 5 structure. 3 लाइन की poems होती है जिसमें पहले में 5 words होते हैं, then 7 words होते हैं, then 5 words होते हैं. Fine. Often about nature. Haikus are very short and concise. Obviously 3-line poem है, it will be short and concise. You just need to know that there is haiku and इनका distribution कैसे होता है 5, 7, 5. Fine. Then we have limerick. Limerick is a 5-line poem with A rhyme scheme, and it is often humorous. It's funny. Fine. Then we have ode. Ode, lyric, elegy, and villanelle. I'll tell you about ode in a little more detail. Fine. First, I'll begin with lyric. Lyric is a short emotional poem. It has been originated from Greek terminology, and originally it was a short song accompanied by lyre. Lyric was accompanied by lyre. Fine, and it is a short song. Elizabethans, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, etc. They all, and even Tennyson used this. Why? Because it is short and emotional. Then the best example of it is The Brook by Tennyson. Music is a significant feature in a lyric. Fine. And there are 2 types of lyrics, subjective and objective. The subjective is personal, fine, expresses his own views, that is subjective, and objective is impersonal, whatever he has been observing. Every kind of poetry initially was subjective and objective. Subjective is where I'll put in my own personal opinions and views, and objective is when I am witnessing something and I am writing about it. Fine. Next we have ode. Ode, ode is something which is elevated in style. Fine. And it is a strain of enthusiastic or exalted lyrical verse, and it is directed purposely to one dignified theme. Jैसे ode to a Grecian urn, ode to the nightingale, ode to melancholy, ode to the psyche. Fine. Subject is lofty, trivial, and dignified usually. Then we have elegy. Elegy is a tribute. It's a poem of lament. Fine. A lamentation and disguised as a, like for example, if a man is disguised as a shepherd and he's crying for or he's lamenting the loss or the death of his another friend who was also a shepherd. So that is elegy. It's a mournful poem, especially a lament for the dead. Fine. Can you give me an example of any elegy that you remember?
An elegy written in a country churchyard.
An elegy written in a country churchyard, in memoriam. Fine. Then we have sonnets. What is the basic, like there is a number which is given to the sonnet. These many number of lines are there in a sonnet. Can anyone tell me the number of lines in a sonnet?
14. 14.
14 lines. Fine. So sonnet, Petrarch brought the sonnets from Italy, and they are Italian. In Italian, people used to call them sonetto, and it is usually written in iambic pentameter. Fine. And William Wordsworth said about Shakespeare that with this key, Shakespeare unlocked his heart. With sonnets, Shakespeare unlocked his heart. Fine. Then we have epic. Epics are long narrative poem like Homer's Iliad. Can anyone tell me which are the 2 epics of Indian origin?
Mahabharata
Tell me
and Ramayana.
the epics.
Mahabharata and Ramayana.
Very good, very good, very good. Then we have metaphysical poetry. Can you tell me any metaphysical poet, whosoever comes to your mind?
John Donne.
John Donne. Very good. John Donne was the father of metaphysical poetry, and he started writing in the early 17th century. Then Samuel Johnson gave the name and brought it from Dryden. Fine. And he also said that he affects the metaphysics. Who? Donne. Andrew Marvell, George Herbert, John Suckling were the other few writers who wrote metaphysical poetry. And then there were the use of conceits, as we've already talked about. Then there was intellectual language, and he always wanted to write something new. These writers, they didn't want to follow the same path. They wanted to write something new. They wanted to walk on a path less traveled by. As Aristotle says, that poetry is an imitation of life. So they wanted to write something that had never been written, that had never been addressed, that had never been talked about, that is new, that is more entreating. So something like that. And they wanted to be obscure. Fine. They didn't want to be caught very easily. They wanted to be mysterious in whatever they were doing. Fine. Then we have dramatic monologue. Can you give me an example of dramatic monologue?
My Last Duchess,
My Last Duchess, written by
Robert Browning,
Robert Browning. Very good, very good. Who was this?
Dipakshi.
Dipakshi. Very good, Dipakshi. Yeah. Just tell me the names of any romantic poet.
Lord Byron, P.B. Shelley, and John Keats.
Very good, very good. Who was this?
Ishita.
Ishita. Very good, Ishita. See, in the year 1789, we had French Revolution. 14 July 1879, we had French Revolution, and in the year 1798, lyrical ballads was published. Fine. And in the edited version in 1802, we had the famous definition of poetry, that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions recollected in tranquility. But the thing is that all of them were writing after a big event which took part at that point of time. So you need to remember the years of both the things, of lyrical ballad as well as of the French Revolution. Now, I've already told you, just revise. In which year did we have French Revolution? It was 1789. 1789. Just remember it like that. 1789. And if you reverse the last two digits, 1798, that is the year in which the lyrical ballads was published. Okay. These are the tricks which you will have to remember and which will help you in the long run. Classical poetry, we have heroic couplets, blank verse, and no strict meter. As you can see in the Rape of the Lock by Pope, who wrote Absalom and Achitophel?
John Dryden,
Very good. The Medal. The Medal. The Medal was also written by John Dryden. Fine. You need to know all the works by these writers. Just know the names of the works which they have written, because it will help you to understand and remember. Because right now, currently, we are focusing on the syllabus that we are having. But other than that, also, which are the major works which are written by them? See, they give you the syllabus, and they can complete only 2 to 3 poems in one semester. But it is your personal duty to know at least all the names of the works written by those writers. Fine. We are just focusing on the famous works. But usually people ask you in different kinds of exams about the other works written by these authors. So you need to go through them also. Fine. Then we have The World is Too Much with Us. Who wrote this? Who wrote The World?
William Wordsworth.
William Wordsworth.
William Wordsworth. Very good. So we have gone through maximum all kinds of poetry, so on and so forth, more or less. Haiku, limerick, ode, lyric, elegy. Villanelle is a 19-line poem comprising 5 triplets with a closing quatrain. What is a quatrain? Quatrain is having 4 lines, and triplets is having 3 lines each. Fine. Next, we have free verse. Free verse abandons traditional rhyme and meter, allowing poets to express themselves with greater freedom and flexibility. Free verse relies on rhythm and cadence to create a sense of flow and musicality. It became popular in the 20th century, reflecting a desire for innovation. when people became unconventional and they wanted to express themselves in the freest and most easiest convenient way, they started writing in free verse. For example, Fog by Carl Sandburg. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. Next, we have exploring poetic forms. We have ballads. Very famous Indian ballad, which comes to my mind every time I read the word ballad. Can you tell me? Can you tell me one very famous Indian ballad? "तेले हर बोलो के मुँह हमने सुनी कहानी थी, खूब लड़ी
Yes,
मर्दानी
ma'am.
वो तो
झांसी वाली रानी की.
Jhansi Wali Rani Thi." Fine. So this is a ballad. Ballads are narrative poems often set to music. They tell stories of love, adventure, or tragedy and often feature refrains. Traditional ballads have a simple rhyme, scheme, and meter, making them accessible and memorable. Ballads capture the essence of human experience. Then we have sonnets. Sonnets typically are of 14-line poems with a specific rhyme scheme, have been a favorite form for British poets. Shakespearean sonnets feature three quatrains and a couplet, while Petrarchan sonnets use an octave and a sestet. Sonnets are often used to explore love, beauty, and mortality. Fine. And the rhyming schemes are all are different for both of them. Like for Shakespearean sonnet also, and for Petrarchan sonnet also. For Petrarchan, we have ABBA, CDE, CDE. And for Shakespearean sonnet, we have ABAB, BCBC, CDCD, EE, or FF or GG, whatever it is, like that. Next, we have major poetic movements: Romanticism, Victorian, and Modernism. Romanticism emphasized emotion, imagination, and individualism. Poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge celebrated nature and sublime. The movement valued personal experience and rejected the rationalism of the Enlightenment. Then we have Victorian. Victorian poetry grappled with social and moral issues, reflecting the era's rapid industrialization and urbanization. Tennyson, Browning explored themes of love, loss, and faith. The Victorian era also saw a revival of interest in classical forms. Modernism. Modernism experimented with form and language, reflecting the fragmentation of modern life. Eliot and Pound challenged traditional conventions. This movement embraced complexity and sought new ways to represent reality. With modernism, we cannot forget the one who wrote The Second Coming. Who is the author who wrote Second Coming?
W.B. Yeats.
W.B. Yeats. Very good. Then we have notable British poets, from Chaucer to Shakespeare. Right? And from Shakespeare to Plath. Who is Plath?
Sylvia Plath.
Sylvia Plath. So, Geoffrey Chaucer, he is considered the father of English literature. His Canterbury Tales is a masterpiece of storytelling and social commentary. If you might have read Canterbury Tales, you will recognize that there was no king. There was no king in that entire poem, and there were no impoverished people in the entire poem. You know why? Can anyone tell me why only the commoners and everyone else was there, but not the king and the impoverished ones? Because it was a social commentary, children. And the thing is that whenever a society is made, the only people who get affected by any law or any adventure or any event or any law or anything that is passed are the commoners, the people who follow the hierarchy and who are in the maze of in the jungle of their occupation, their family, and their achievements and their everything else. When you are in the social you can say when you are in a class, in the social class, you are affected by everything else. That's why it was a social commentary. A king is never affected by the laws, and those who are very poor, who are impoverished, they are unaffected by any of the laws. Fine. So only the middle class people, or the people who are earning and who are working hard for the laws and the rituals and so on and so forth, they are being considered in this work, and not everyone else. So, Chaucer's use of Middle English made literature accessible to the wider audience. Then we have William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare is renowned for his plays and sonnets. His works explore universal theme of love, ambition, and revenge. Shakespeare's language and characters continue to captivate audiences centuries later. William Wordsworth was a key figure in the Romantic movement. His poetry celebrated nature and the power of human emotions. Wordsworth's lyrical ballads helped to define the Romantic aesthetics. Can you tell me a few more works of William Wordsworth? Any poetry that you remember of William Wordsworth?
Tintern Abbey.
Tintin Abbey and
3 years she grew.
3 years she grew. Very good.
I wandered lonely as a cloud.
I wondered.
Upon Westminster Bridge.
Very good, very good, amazing. Then we have Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath was a prominent modernist poet. Her confessional poetry explored themes of mental illness and female identity. Plath's work is characterized by its intensity and raw emotional power. The sonnet 18, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, explores the theme of eternal beauty. Shakespeare uses metaphors to praise his beloved enduring qualities, and the poem's structure and language contributes to its timeless appeal. You all must go and read Sonnet 18. Then we have Wordsworth's Tintin Abbey. Lines composed a few miles above the Tintin Abbey reflects on the power of nature to inspire and heal. The poem explores themes of memory, loss, and sublime. Wordsworth's use of blank verse creates a conversational tone. Eliot's The Waste Land captures the fragmentation and disillusionment of the modern world. The poem uses fragmented imagery and allusions to create a sense of chaos. Eliot's innovative technique challenges traditional poetic conventions. Just know 4 more terms so that it'll be easier for you to understand. One is, I'll just tell you the types of verse. Verse is a single line of poetry. Syllables are there, and when they appear in one line, known as verse. So first is free verse. As I've already told you, it is a category which has no rhyme and meter, and it follows a conventional poetry and makes its lines break. Fine. This is Walt Whitman की poetry थी, I just belong to you. Fine. This is a free verse. Then we have blank verse. In blank verse, poetry is based on unrhymed lines but definite meter. Fine. Blank verse में definite meter होता है, free verse में definite meter नहीं होता है. That's it. Iambic meter होता है blank verse में. जैसे कि आप introduced by Earl of Surrey in translation of Iliad. Blank verse was introduced by the Earl of Surrey in the translation of Iliad made by him. Then we have enjambment. What is enjambment? That is run-on lines. Example, when we write prose, we write in sentences. In poetry, you write in lines with a beat. Each line does not have to be a full sentence. Running of thought from one line to another without a break or punctuation is enjambment. When any line is written and it is having a complete meaning in one line, that is a normal verse. But when there are run-on lines, that my sentence is not being complete in one line, and then I'm going on to the next line and then completing it there, and then continuing the next line from there, that is known as enjambment. The run-on lines in a poetry is known as enjambments. Fine. Then we have caesura, that is the pause in line of a poetry. Caesura is a pause in the lines of poetry. Fine. And then we have refrain. Refrain is a French word, it means to repeat. A word, a line, or a group of lines which are repeated. For example, rage, rage. Woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. This is an example of refrain. Who wrote this poem? Miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Who wrote this? Woods are lovely, dark and deep. Very good. Robert Frost. Epic poetry is the last topic that I'll be dealing with you all today, because epic poetry is something which everyone asks time and again. And this kind of poetry, yesterday GATE exam was there and they asked us about the qualities of an epic poetry. So you need to know that long narrative poem with a hero who encounters monsters and other difficulties is mentioned in an epic poetry. Poem which we all associate with legends, which we love to associate ourselves with. For example, Iliad and Odyssey, courage, love, boldness, city of Troy. Fine. Then we have Paradise Lost, where we explain the ways of God to men, innovations to the muse and grand style, and then it elevates the stress of hero. Fine, where the hero was from where he began and now where he is. The importance it is having a particular, meaning. The entire epic is having a particular story and a particular message to be given. Fine. It is having a high style, lofty style, and the language cannot be, of lower standards because it is an epic. So the language is good. It is having a meaning. A hero is there, and the action is taking place in it throughout. Fine. And what is a mock epic? Can anyone tell me what is a mock epic? What is a mock epic? Do you have any idea what a mock epic is? A mock epic is where the hero is mocked, is satirized. Fine. That is known as a mock epic. For example, The Rape of the Lock by Pope. Fine. That's all. So this was all from my side. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My sincere thanks for your remarkable presentation on British poetry, elements and types. Ma'am, your insights and expertise made a significant impact and we are grateful for your valuable contribution. Thank you again for sharing your knowledge with us. And the topic was very well received by the audience. And thank you so much again and have a great day ahead. We look forward to have more of these interesting and informative lectures with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.